Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in today to the second session of the Center for Digital Governance Research Colloquium. We're welcoming Carolina Are today, who's a researcher, activist, blogger, and has a PhD in content moderation. She's an innovation fellow at the Northumbria University Center for Digital Citizen, and I think the rest she will probably tell you just now in her presentation. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. I'm just going to share my slides. It's they're quite funky, so trigger warning, there might be some nudity. It's still nudity that would be allowed on social media platforms, but again, you never know with these things. So hopefully Teams isn't as boring as Instagram. Let me share and we can start. Okay, so as I mentioned, some nudity there, but then again, if you're coming to my presentation, you're probably aware since it's very, since a lot of my research is exactly focused on my own experiences of censorship and content moderation. There we go. It stopped glitching. Sorry. Teams is not my friend in the past or has not been my friend in the past couple of weeks. So as Philip was mentioning, I'm Dr. Carolina Are. I'm an innovation fellow at the Center for Digital Citizens at Northumbria University. Today, I'll be telling you about my experiences of pole dancing against the algorithm and of being a researcher as well as a naked censored user. And I will also share insights from my current project on deplatforming and on malicious flagging. Ahead of this, you can find me all over social media at Blogger on Pole. I'm pretty much on any platform, apart maybe from OnlyFans, because that's just too much work. I can't be bothered. But as I said, you'll probably be seeing more images like this. So maybe don't open it in the office, depending on your type of work. So what can we expect from today? I will be telling you all about my experiences and activism and research on shadow banning and online censorship post-FOSTA-SESTA, which is an American piece of legislation that I will be telling you about in a sec. I will also be sharing findings from my qualitative research, which is grounded in user experience, like my experience, but also in the experiences of users in my network. I will also be sharing information and findings from, oops, sorry, that was not what I wanted you to see. There we go. I just wanted to move the window. I will be sharing insights from my project at the Center for Digital Citizens, which, as I mentioned, is between online abuse and online censorship. You are also welcome to ask me questions after, which, of course, you can do live and, unmuting yourself. But I'm also aware that some people don't like speaking or don't like attaching their names to challenging questions. So I have an app called NGL. Some of you might have used it. It's about asking anonymous questions. So if you type ngl.link/bloggeronpole in your browser, you can start asking questions even now as we speak. It's up to you how you want to interact, essentially. But without further ado, just a little bit about me and about how my personal experience has informed my research. I have published one of the first, if not the first, peer-reviewed study on shadow banning, and particularly on the shadow banning of pole dancing in feminist media studies. This came out in 2021, and it's informed by how I discovered that my account was being shadow banned and how then I started activism campaigns against it. For those of you who might not know, shadow banning is a light censorship technique whereby platforms don't delete your content outright. They just don't recommend it to the explore page or for you page. So the main feed where you see the majority of content, or sometimes they actively demote it. What's really damaging about shadow banning is that more often than not, you are not notified that this is taking place. So this means that you're kind of being gaslighted into thinking that your content is not doing well because it's boring, while it's actually the platform that's been fiddling with it. Now Instagram does notify you of shadow banning, But again, it's not very easy to kind of revert this decision, meaning that if you're a content creator making money through views and through recommending your products or your content to other people, you can't actually do that. So how did I discover that I was being shadow banned? Well, my experiences as initially an amateur pole dancer and then a pole dancing instructor and performer were crucial to that. So I was doing a PhD in digital criminology at City University. I was focusing on online abuse, and this was my second year. At the time, I realized that because of the community that I was studying, if I were to publish for my PhD, I would be the target of never-ending online abuse, like other researchers that have published about this community in the past. Luckily or unluckily, during that time, Instagram started censoring pole dancers, and obviously before us, sex workers. This is on the back of an American law that I will be introducing in a second, but I decided to write a really scathing post about Instagram and this practice on my blog, bloggeronpole.com. But because I have a past in journalism and PR and communications, I felt like slagging off a major corporation in a blog post without giving them the right to reply was a one-way ticket towards trouble. So I emailed their press email address thinking, lol, they're never going to reply. But they did reply. So that started a conversation between me and Instagram where they initially denied that any wrongdoing was taking place. Then in the summer of 2019, Instagram began shadow banning all of pole dancing hashtags, meaning that essentially pole dance was invisible or searchable on their platform. A variety of very high profile and I would say Instagram famous pole dancers created a petition about that or against that. And because I was blogging about it from the perspective of a social media professional, but also a content moderation researcher as much as a censored user, and they noticed that I was speaking to Instagram, they were like, oh, why don't we join forces? So we joined forces. I asked Instagram questions coming from all our combined networks, and Instagram ended up apologizing to pole dancers about shadow banning. They didn't use the word shadow banning, they just said our hashtags were blocked in error, but that was the first time that Instagram actually acknowledged that they suppressed views of content that they didn't like. So this made the news because obviously a lot of people resonated with that and they realized that it wasn't just about pole dancers and sex workers, it was also happening to sex educators, to activists, to lingerie and sex toy brands, to models, to photographers, to a variety of users, essentially. So that led us from the initial coalition of pole dancers to team up with more accounts. And we created this campaign known as Everybody Visible in October 2019. It went viral. It became really big. We were demanding more transparency, more clarity, and more fairness, really, from Instagram. Dita Von Teese, the burlesque performer, ended up supporting it. And even Adam Mosseri, the CEO of Instagram, acknowledged that our demands were feasible. We asked people to tag the Instagram and Facebook chiefs in their posts about Everybody Visible, which is what you can see in this picture here. So if you went on Sheryl Sandberg's tagged section at the time, it was all butts and boobies and, you know, naked people as well as our logo. So this experience essentially catapulted me in a network of censored users that allowed me then to continue researching in this field. So this is where my paper, The Shadow Ban Cycle, published in Feminist Media Studies, comes from. So the way I conceptualize censorship of nudity on platforms, which if you've noticed, essentially happens a lot more than censorship of violence, is as an extension of world risk society theory. So world risk society theory is a theory by Beck and Giddens, some criminologists from the 1990s, and essentially it described institutions and businesses' attempts to reduce the risks of late modernity as a way of restricting civil liberties, because they had to anticipate a variety of risks, and in doing that, they had to identify society's undesirables. They did so by outsourcing this power to insurance firms, so to private companies. And this is what's happening on social media at the moment. So platforms are finding themselves having to anticipate risks that they can't anticipate. They anticipate the wrong risks, and as a result, they other and exclude a population of users. And in doing so, they are essentially acting as governments while actually they're private companies. And why am I using this framework? Well, because platforms use the term safety a lot. They say that they censor things because they need to keep their user base safe. But actually, as you will see later on in this presentation, it's more about their image, the safety of their image, the safety of their earnings. So the way I described this shadow ban cycle is that social media platforms are always failing to tackle online harms because they've grown exponentially and they have a lot of content to deal with. There's a push for them by both politicians and civil society to do something about it. So for image reasons, they need to really tackle online harms. So they picked something very easy to pick up and to get rid of, a scapegoat, which is nudity, sexual activity, and sex work. All the while, harmful content is still there. So this is a loop that continues and that essentially replicates offline inequalities. How does this translate to social media community guidelines? Well, if you look at Instagram and TikTok in particular, which are the main platforms you could say that are used for content creation, there's also YouTube, which has very similar issues. But for my research and because of my experience, I focus on Instagram and on TikTok. On Instagram, nudity is in the same sentence as spam. It's something people don't want to see, people shouldn't see, and something people are targeted with. Even worse, sex work, which is a job, is in the same paragraph as the harms to regulate that are terrorism, organized crime, hate groups. So essentially, selling sexual services in the eyes of the platform is as bad as terrorism, or at least the lumping in of sex work within these practices leads a reader to think so. On TikTok, things are very similar. So they try to reduce things that are culturally inappropriate. They have trust and safety in mind. And this is how they govern this type of content through algorithms. So this governance is automated. These rules, these community standards are enforced by algorithms that essentially remove or suppress content or accounts. But why this focus on nudity? Well, because of FOSTA SESTA. So it's the legislation that I've been mentioning for quite a while, this American piece of legislation approved by the Trump government in 2018. It's an exception to Section 230 of the US Telecommunications Act, while platforms essentially enjoy a form of limited liability as an intermediary, in the sense that if something horrible gets posted on Instagram, Zuckerberg is not always going to be liable for it. Well, suddenly, because of FOSTA SESTA, they became liable for content that promoted or facilitated sex trafficking and sex work. So sex trafficking, a crime, is blended here by this piece of legislation with sex work, a job. As a result, platforms began over-censoring to protect themselves and their images, to not be seen as being in violation of FOSTA SESTA. This has been a tragedy for internet freedom, and this is something that worldwide most people agree with. A law which should have protected victims of a crime instead has changed the web as we know it. And it's not only made it impossible for people who work with their bodies to essentially thrive on social media, it also has endangered the victims of trafficking it aims to protect, because these people are not visible anymore on platforms. Essentially, they're underground again. And this has resulted in a form of powerlessness, as I said, not just for sex workers who were the main targets of this law, but also for users across the board. So there's pictures of me here. You might be wondering why is Carolina here in a picture with an old lady? Well, that's my grandma. She's 93. I posted that picture with her after seeing her for the first time after the lockdowns. And it was that picture, apparently, not my videos of me pole dancing in skimpy outfits that got me deleted. I posted that picture, logged back in, account was gone. The only way I managed to recover that account for the deletion of which didn't warrant an explanation for Instagram, I didn't get a notification for it or an explanation, was through media contacts. So journalists found it ironic that a content moderation expert would be the platform, so they ended up writing articles about it. And as a result, my account was restored within 24 hours. To this day, I still don't know why it was deleted, how it was deleted, what went wrong. And there was no way for me to appeal conventionally within the platform. So if it wasn't for these journalists, I wouldn't have had my account back. And at the time, I didn't have a job like I do now. I wasn't a postdoc. I was largely a content creator and a pole instructor selling her classes through social media. So that was my main source of income at the time. On TikTok, things weren't much better. If anything, they were worse. I grew on TikTok really fast, and I started using it because it seemed easier to grow on it during the pandemic than it was on Instagram. Then what happened was when I posted a video saying that I was a pole dancer WAP with a PhD, with a snippet of a choreo of me dancing to Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B's song, I went viral overnight. So I woke up with 80,000 followers and a video that had surpassed 1 million views, which is very overwhelming as a user, first of all. But second of all, a variety of people were hating me in the comments because they thought that what I was posting was not appropriate for children, for the platform's diverse audience or whatever. And they were saying horrible things to me, like I was getting rape threats, I was, getting a lot of misogynist abuse. And all of those comments that I would report were not seen to be in violation of community guidelines by the platform, but it was my content that started getting taken down. So, and this is something that, as you will see, is informing my research at the moment. It's not a stretch to think that all of these people that were hating on my content, they were saying that it was dangerous and immoral, would then go and report it, because then all of a sudden a lot of my videos started getting taken down to the point that my account got taken down. Once again, I only got it back thanks to a journalist who wrote this article about me, as you can see in the screenshot. TikTok restored my account and apologized, saying that it was a mistake. Thing is, it happened again. So a few months after, my account was deleted 3 times in a week alone, to the point where it would get restored, then it would get deleted again, and then it came to the point where I couldn't even appeal it anymore. And again, the same journalist who wrote this article, the amazing Crystal Walker, got me my account back by tweeting at their CEO. So otherwise, I couldn't have managed to get it back. And I was trying to speak to their creator support team because by now, because of my research and my experiences, I speak to Instagram and feedback on their practices and policies. I was trying to do the same for TikTok because I was like, guys, this is clearly inefficient. It's happening to a lot of people. And, it's not helpful to me or to you to keep having to deal with this. And what creator support told me at the time was that as long as I posted implied nudity, my content would be taken down. Now, it's up to you to kind of decide what this means, but you can imply I'm naked underneath my clothes right now. If we run content moderation on implications, then anyone can imply anything. So this doesn't just happen to me, by the way. You can see some screenshots of comments that I receive, so that I'm immoral, that what I do is demeaning and inappropriate. But actually, as the screenshots from the articles that you can see in the bottom left and in the top right, this happens to a variety of people. So it's happened to Ukrainian activists posting about the war and essentially them being mass reported by Russian trolls. It's happened to porn performers who were deplatformed after a purge by a self-professed incel. So platform governance is opening up users, not just to online abuse, but also to deplatforming, which leads to then loss of earnings and, a variety of other issues, as you will see in a second. I call this phenomenon in a recent paper automated powerlessness, which is a phenomenon that arises when the power that social media afford to a group, whether it's platforms themselves or malicious users, outweigh the possibilities that targeted users have to question or reverse these decisions, or even to rehabilitate themselves. So in short, this is a really inadequate form of governance because it allows deplatforming, but not rehabilitation, and it hands the reins of platform governance to the most conservative users. Plus, this powerless is not something that is equally distributed to users. As you can see from this graphic that I made, where I had to blur out the boobs because I wanted to post it on Instagram, and I knew that if I posted it, my account would get deleted, does not apply to celebrities. So as you can see, verified users, celebrity users are allowed to post all forms of nudity, but normal users that are not verified are not. So there is a form of lucrative sexiness and nudity that celebrities bring to the platform because it's newsworthy, it brings clicks to the platform, it brings new users in, but users that work through those same bodies and that are not famous are viewed as dangerous instead and deplatformed as a result. So this brings me to my current project at the Center for Digital Citizens, where I'm essentially putting my own experiences into action, and I'm testing them out amongst a variety of deplatformed users. I'm focusing on the intersection of flagging and deplatforming. So flagging is essentially reporting, right? It's that mechanism for reporting content to social media platforms where you as a user can address your concerns and say, why is this allowed? But within an already opaque and unequal social media governance process, flagging can also be weaponized against accounts that other users disagree with, in a phenomenon that other researchers such as Fiore Silfast have called user-generated warfare. So flagging can essentially become a really crippling online abuse technique. What I've done to find out more about it and about its link or relationship with the platforming was do a qualitative survey amongst over 120 users and a set of semi-structured interviews to infer Instagram's and TikTok's approach to malicious flagging. I have circulated the survey and done these interviews amongst users that have been known to be targeted by this practice. So sex workers, pole dancers, LGBTQIA+ content creators, as well as activists and journalists and sex educators. My inclusion criteria were very narrow because of these experiences. So participants must have had their Instagram or TikTok accounts or content removed, and they must have received negative comments on said account. This is, again, leading with what happened to me. So my preliminary findings that are currently being written up as papers, some of them forthcoming and in production, have essentially highlighted that there are a lot of loopholes within platforms' flagging functionality, which leads it to become a form of community policing. So this opens up marginalized communities and stigmatized subjects to silencing and abuse because users know that platforms tend to censor nudity, for instance, and they know that they have a good shot at getting that content down just by flagging it. On the other hand, appeals are incredibly inadequate to the point that users have told me, I don't think I ever spoke to a human. So they essentially feel silenced and completely powerless in the face of platform governance. This results in the loss of money and opportunities, destroying business relationships. It has a chilling effect on artists who essentially have to self-censor to avoid being deplatformed, and users feel discrimination and shame in a space that they felt was safe. I'm talking about stigmatized users in particular, like sex workers and LGBTQ+ users. So because of the lacking affordances when it comes to appealing, users face a set of barriers. They don't have any information about deletions, or they don't have specific information about deletions. So they have no way of doing better if they were to set up another account because they don't know why they got deplatformed. This disabling of profiles without warning means that users can't plan for it. So they can't plan for the loss of money. They just have to tread lightly. They always walk on thin ice. Plus, this very unequal system is weaponized by malicious users, and because of FOSTA SESTA, nudity is viewed as inherently sexual. So if you're naked, you're automatically performing a sex act, and because sex is viewed as risky and dangerous by platforms, you're essentially breaking guidelines by default. This relies on a very Puritan and unequal form of governance, which views sex as harmful. So this denotes a fear of bodies and sex, a very sex-negative approach to content moderation, and it also mirrors the problems of retributive forms of governance, which overlook the needs and interests of targets of harassment, but also they remove offenses and offenders from the community without giving them a chance to rehabilitate themselves. Also, all offenders and violators are treated equally, meaning that if you've, let's say, posted a rape threat, you are treated in the same way as someone who has posted a boob, and vice versa, as if these two were the same thing. And this is a form of banishment and ostracization of content, particularly of sex and of nudity, which is essentially placed in the hands of a private company and not a government. This is where I bring in my corpo-civic analogy. So I described in previous research social media platforms as corpo-civic spaces, essentially like a shopping mall. So a shopping mall is a private entity, a corporate entity that performs some form of civic space function. Third space theory describes liminal spaces split between a public and a private use. So from the poles of home and work, something in the middle. A shopping mall is something like that. And the owners of shopping malls can, of course, exclude customers, but they need, like, generally they should say why, and they can't just exclude someone because they don't like their face. They should still apply international human rights standards and not discriminate. Well, platforms are not doing that at the moment. They're acting entirely as corporate companies without acknowledging their civic space function. So following my research, I've been recommending more transparency and personalized notifications to users about deletion, investment in better customer service in the form of deleted creators communication teams, and recognizing malicious flagging as a form of online abuse. Plus, pressed too fast, automation should be improved. Platforms shouldn't assume that sexual activity is synonymous with nudity. They should govern nudity consensually. They shouldn't sexualize their users all the time. They should understand that bodies have freedom of expression in the same way that bodies do. And they should also interrogate their own biases, because why is something inappropriate? Why is something sexual? Why do they not interrogate their own gaze, their own lens when they're moderating content? So after all of these questions and after having been very polemic, I will stop presenting and I would like to leave the space open to you for questions. You can do that through NGL, which I'm now going to leave open, or you can do that in the comments or by unmuting yourself, up to you. But thank you so much for your attention. You can find me at this email or at Blogger on Poll if I'm still there. I'll stop presenting now.